Great. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for joining this CWCF Co-op Zone joint session that we're having this evening, this beautiful evening of the 16th of November. From wherever you are joining, thank you so much for coming out. My name is Michael Norris, and I work as the administrator of Co-op Zone. I will be your facilitator for this evening. Just a few housekeeping items. If you require simultaneous translation, that is available just in the bar below your screen. You will see an option with a globe that says interpretation. You can select English or French as you desire. We have our wonderful translators here from Co-op who will be helping us with that. Should you have any technical difficulties during this call, please feel free to reach out with some of our team members who are providing technical support. I would say that the lead on that is Kay Grant for this evening, but we have a few other individuals on the line as well who could provide support. So just please feel free to send a direct message to them if you're having any troubles, and we will hopefully get you sorted. I would also ask if you are planning on speaking in French. Our interpreters work very hard, and it's not an easy job for anyone who has tried to interpret in the past on a Zoom call. So please just speak clearly, speak slowly, and when you will be transitioning from English into French, please let us know, and feel free to pause to give our interpreters time to be able to switch between the languages of English and French so that everyone can understand what we are saying at any given point in time on this call. Now, I think that is just about everything. So I'm looking forward to speaking with Hazel for these first 30 minutes about the CWCF policy priorities for the upcoming year, and hoping to have a little bit of a discussion with regards to that. So without further ado, I'd like to bring Hazel up to the virtual stage. Hazel, thanks so much for joining us.
Well, thank you very much, Michael. And I have to start by explaining why I am not Matthew Green. Which is that, unfortunately, we got a call from his office this afternoon saying he has a horrible migraine and he's really disappointed that he cannot join, but that he wants to offer to speak to our group at a later date, which is both good and bad. Hopefully it means we'd give him more than 15 minutes. And I'm happy to hear that he found it a disappointment to not be able to join us. And Colin will be able to talk to you more about him as well. We do have a 3-minute excerpt from a video of him speaking about worker co-ops that I'm going to show, and then I'm going to talk about the CWCF policy priorities and seek your input as to whether we have the right ones. Let me share my screen and not forget to press the button to share sound, obviously. So where did that go? Well, hold on just half a sec, because I think it's no longer there. I see it now. Now I'll go back to Zoom. Oh dear. Oh dear. Okay, I just have to not share yet. I'm not in a sharing mood this second here. Okay, now I am. Sorry, folks. The button is clicked. Yay, I see it.
Thing that I only learned about in my mid-20s. Do you want to talk a little bit about worker cooperatives, why you think they're important, why they should be more central to the contemporary narrative?
Well, I think that it's no secret, right, that there has been a concerted effort to suppress workers' wages, to keep unemployment high, and to keep opportunities scarce in order to keep those wages low and keep people in scarcity by the, I would say, as a symptom of free trade and neoliberalism, the idea of being under the constant threat that if you don't suppress your own quality of life for the capitalist class, that they will uproot and take their jobs elsewhere, was absolutely experienced here in Hamilton Center when we watched the liquidation and the reimagination of US Steel, and through the process of what was called CCAA, which was a bankruptcy process that basically took away the long-fought pensions and benefits of seniors and retirees, as part of a bankruptcy process that ended up allowing the company to restructure, change the name, and lose its liabilities. We see it present in Hamilton Specialty Bar when Bain Capital bankrupted a 100-year-old business that had 4 generations of workers, that had hundreds of workers kind of left in the lurch for the simple process of maximizing shareholder value.
I just want to say that that's not the spot I meant to go to. So I'm going to go back and start where he's actually speaking to worker co-ops.
Thing that I only learned about in my mid-20s. Do you want to talk a little bit about worker cooperatives, why you think they're important, why they should be more central to the contemporary narrative?
Well, I think that it's no secret that there has been a concerted effort to suppress workers' wages.
Never mind. I just wanted to give you a little flavor for what he was speaking on. And that is a half-hour-long interview, all of which is really excellent. That was done by Colin, who you're going to hear from after I have my 7 minutes or less on our public policy priorities. So the Canadian Worker Co-op Federation, always of the view that the worker co-op movement is far below its potential and wanting to build an ecosystem, has long engaged in federal policy initiatives, and really, honestly, depending on who was in government, it sort of dictated how active we were, because we certainly knew in the Harper years that there was really not any point in lobbying. We couldn't get anywhere. We'd send them a 10-page brief and get a 1-page, not even 1-page letter saying we'll take it under advisement with no contact information. But with Liberal governments, we have been able to make some progress. For example, allowing us to offer RRSPs in worker co-ops and other related kinds of co-ops. That was a very early victory before I was even involved in the early 90s. And another time to get our small Tenacity Works Fund, which we're still operating as a revolving loan fund and hope to grow significantly through the social finance fund that the Liberals announced a few years ago, and we hope and think rolling out soon, of up to 750 million. You know, we've got not even quite $500,000 in our small Tenacity Works Fund, and we hope to grow it significantly, certainly to the 20 million range kind of a thing. But you know, where we are right now in terms of trying to build an ecosystem, we're trying to take the sort of 3 areas I want to talk about. One is that we want to take advantage of the momentum that's out there by social capital partners based in Toronto to grow, to create legally the employee ownership trust model in Canada and include tax incentives for it and other incentives potentially. Secondly is to put into place technical assistance and other kinds of resources, mostly financial resources, that would enable really helping to support and grow and capitalize the movement, notably on conversions. And third, a whole variety of tax measures that I don't probably have time to talk about in detail. But in terms of the first point, the employee ownership trust and how we're trying to sort of grab onto the coattails that social capital partners has, I'm actually very, very optimistic, because we have a if you look up social capital partners and employee ownership trust, you'll find online a whole variety of documents that talk about why they think this kind of employee ownership is so important, and what's going on in the UK and the US with ESOPs and so on, and how Canada lacks this sort of a thing. And you know, those of us involved in the worker co-op movement would much prefer to see a democratic version of this, you know, through the worker co-op model, or democratic ESOPs at least. But anyway, I'm happy to say that we were able to work with CMC to create a briefing note, which basically states, you know, in 3 pages, why we think worker co-ops should have the same or comparable treatment as employee ownership trusts. And we had a great meeting with the leadership in social capital partners like about a month ago, and we were very pleasantly surprised that they were very willing to, you know, work with us, because we found the language they had about worker co-ops to be pretty dismissive and not taking the model very seriously. And you know, for instance, they said, you know, they're a tiny portion of the co-op movement and they're not growing, and they're, you know, here's an example, worker co-op tattoo parlor. Well, there may or may not be any worker co-op tattoo parlors. I've never personally heard of one, but it's just not a kind of mainstream business that's going to make liberal ministers say, oh, well, we want to get into that, right? So we're going to be asking them to tone down their language and make it more neutral. And they asked us the same, because I mean, we were trying to be neutral, but we did end up saying we think worker co-ops are better, and here's why, sort of. And we changed our document for them. And so once the conference has gone by and I have time to dive back in, we're going to ask them the same. And Marty, I know you know Bill Young, and I'm hoping that you might be willing to put in a good word for us as well. He's the sort of founder of Social Capital Partners. Thank you. Anyway, the next item is one that we've really focused on in the last since COVID hit. You know, we've got this proposal that Russ Christensen was very instrumental in helping us to write, and Pierre Cyr, who's on the line too, has been very instrumental in helping us to push forward in the early times of the pandemic around. Really, the focus now for us is we'd like to see resources into conversions to co-ops, to worker co-ops, whether it's for retiring owners or businesses closing due to COVID, as long as they can break even, right, at least, or better. And that conversion project is something we've been talking about for years, and at times and jointly with CMC and times not. Lately it's not, but we do have an agreement with CMC that they will only talk about this with regard to non-worker co-ops, and we're the lead for worker co-ops, which is great. We've tried to get that through, like we kind of lost steam. We didn't get into the government at the time. They were shoveling money out the window in early COVID times when we hoped that we would. And a part of that as well is to grow our fund. And I think we reached a bit far in what we were asking for in that time frame, is just sort of the times of the day. And we need to focus more the fund, the Tenacity Works fund that we have, on the social finance fund and fitting in there. Another piece that we want to have in there, but we don't currently have written up, is something around general co-op development support and technical assistance for that. And then lastly, there's a whole variety of tax measures, and I'm just going to refer you to our documentation on that, because I don't think there's time to get into it. Part of it is indivisible reserves and having favorable tax measures for that. And I'm really happy to say that CMC, after years, literally years, probably 7 or 8 of us trying to get them to agree that, or their membership actually, to state that the whole co-op sector ought to be lobbying for this, that did pass at their AGM in June. And so it's now on CMC's public policy priorities, as well as ours, to lobby for favorable tax treatment for indivisible reserves. I apologize if you don't know what that is. It's a kind of a technical thing, but it's like basically an asset lock and or permanent co-op capital, and we are looking for a favorable tax treatment for co-ops with indivisible reserves. That includes all the co-ops in Quebec, and you know, others can choose that by their bylaws and so on. So anyway, I want to turn it over to Colin now to talk about his project, and Michael, you can take back facilitating, and thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Hazel. And I mean, with that, I'll introduce Colin. Colin, thank you so much for being on the line today. You know, you have a pretty extensive history with cooperatives, and you know, you really are a jack of all trades, in the sense of you have many passions. You know, I was reading over, you know, some of the things that nourish you, and you know, your work with Brock University and Centennial College, and your work in theater, as well as your work in cooperatives. I have to say, it really is quite impressive. So, you know, I think without further ado, I'm just going to stop talking, and I'm going to hand it over to you so that you can introduce yourself to us and your passion beyond cooperatives as well.
Thank you so much, Michael. Thanks. Thank you, everybody. It's such a pleasure to be here with you all this evening. My name is Colin Brusantis. I'm the founder of Community Wealth Candidates. We're a volunteer group with a mandate of building towards a democratic economy centered around worker cooperatives, as well as community land trusts, and the progressive use of anchor institutions. We have a mission that is really twofold. On the one hand, we do work with community organizations and activists to help promote and organize this kind of activity. But the other thing that we do is we work with political candidates at all levels of government, municipal, provincial, and federal. And we offer endorsements for candidates who support policies that are good for community wealth building. So in the last federal election, we endorsed 34 candidates who came out in support of a right of first refusal policy, which would give workers first dibs on purchasing their enterprise, taking it under worker control whenever it's going to change hands in any way. And some of those candidates actually did win their elections. So that was a sign of optimism in what was otherwise a strange copy and paste election from 2019. But we were really proud of the progress that was made there. During that election cycle, we also made 3 half-hour-long videos, one with the fantastic MP Matthew Green from Hamilton Centre, which you saw a little bit of there, another with Peter Julian, the House Leader of the federal NDP, and also with the London Brewing Co-operative, which is a wonderful worker cooperative in London, Ontario. Those are all posted on our website if you want to check them out. The term community wealth building was coined by a group called the Democracy Collaborative in the United States. And they're the architects of the Cleveland model of community wealth, which was initiated about 13 years ago to help pull people out of poverty in one of the poorest neighborhoods of Cleveland, Ohio. And today the number of employees that they have under worker cooperatives there is 4 times the size it was when they started 13 years ago. So it's not just had success, it's had rapidly expanding success. A version of that model, a larger version of that model, was then taken across the pond to London, England, or to Preston, England, the city of Preston, England, which has subsequently been named the most improved city in the entire United Kingdom. And since then, many other community wealth initiatives have popped up around the world. The city of Chicago just announced a $15 million pilot project for community wealth building. And that's the kind of activity that we're hoping to help spark across the country. We're working to help spark across Canada. The premise is very simple. We begin by looking at the different ways that members of a community can hold wealth in common. And we look to expand those different ways. Broad-based ownership of the companies that a community of workers work for, the best version of which, of course, is the worker-owned cooperative, which we spend most of our time arguing for because it's so democratic, is a fantastic example of a community holding wealth in common. Community land trusts. We talk about the housing crisis right now, the swirling housing crisis in Canada, often fairly badly. It's almost universally discussed as a matter of supply and demand around the physical housing structures themselves. But what's really skyrocketing are the land values underneath those housing structures. And that's incentivizing people to hold on to the keys of empty housing units, even as people are desperately searching for places to live. In a community land trust, a group of people from a community take a plot of land off the market and under the control of a nonprofit enterprise on a long-term basis, usually through a 99-year lease. And then when the land values rise, they can capture those land values, invest them productively back into the community, offer affordable access to that land, usually to provide permanent affordable housing, intergenerational affordable housing, but also to provide affordable access for any kind of development that that community may need. That can include cooperative enterprise, along with social enterprise, cultural enterprise, and things that get pushed out through gentrification. And then anchor institutions. We often do not realize just how much progressive investment is potentially at our disposal, especially for worker-owned cooperatives. But pretty much all of us in our communities have fairly large-scale nonprofit, public, quasi-public enterprises, things like schools, universities, colleges, hospitals, libraries, religious institutions, performing arts centers, things that can't just get up and leave our community very easily. They always have to purchase lots of goods and services from outside organizations, in total, many billions of dollars each year. Typically, they're purchasing them from standard capitalist corporations. Profits are going into the hands of a tiny number of corporate owners who then stave them in offshore tax havens, and the wealth leaves the community completely. But they also have mandates to operate for community and public benefit and not for profit. And that means that they are open to being organized to purchase intentionally locally for community benefit, anchoring good jobs in the community, and prioritizing local worker-owned companies that are going to put the profits into the hands of many different local worker owners who are also going to continue to spend that money locally. It's going to keep doing good things in the community. So it's good, simple, straightforward economics. The stroke of genius that the Democracy Collaborative had was they started looking at how these things can be brought together to support each other in a complex, so that you can have your funding from and your loans from things like credit unions, municipal governments, public banks, to start worker-owned cooperatives in communities. Then you can have your anchor institutions purchasing from those worker cooperatives and anchoring good democratic employment in the community. And then as the prosperity grows and the land values go up and you start to get those gentrifying effects, You've got your community land trust there to capture some of those land values, invest them back into the community, make sure people are not getting squeezed out of the communities that they're making prosperous. And so we can have the whole gamut potentially, the democratic jobs, the good investment, and the affordable housing in perpetuity. And that's the kind of thing that we are working to coordinate in different communities and working with politicians to put on a larger scale on the map in Canada. I imagine I'm coming up at my time limit now, so I'll just say very quickly that what we're doing right now is we're reaching out to student groups in post-secondary institutions, encouraging them to lobby their administrators to get courses in cooperative management as part of their curriculums in the schools, which we do not have nearly enough of, and to start thinking about their institutions as potential anchor institutions that can do things like purchase from local worker-owned cooperatives to anchor those good democratic jobs in the community and help build community wealth. And then over the course of the next year, we will also be endorsing provincial and municipal candidates. Hopefully we don't go through another federal election, but we will be endorsing candidates at those other levels of government as well. I'll wrap it up there. Thank you so much, everybody. I've been a big fan of this organization for a long time, so it's a treat to be presenting here with you all today. I'll turn it back on over to Michael. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Colin. That's such an influential presentation. I really do think that resonates with a lot of people on the call here today. And I think, getting into our next element, before I get into that, I will pass it off to Hazel for a few moments. But I think, getting into our conversation with Russ and David about, that specific conversation is really going to be so interesting to kind of hear about how that work is being performed on the ground and what we can do more as a cooperative community to ensure that we're not losing sight of that. I just wanted to turn it back to Hazel just for a few moments here to see if you had anything that you would like to remark with regards to that before we move on to the co-op zone aspects of the session.
I really appreciate all that Colin has brought to this conversation and the work that organization or the Community with Candidates group has done. It's really inspiring. I love the videos. I've listened to 2 out of 3 and they're great. One of them being on London Brewing, of course, is the co-op that's going to be getting our Worker Co-op Best Practices Award and also presenting on their marketing practices Thursday. So thanks for all that great work, that great volunteer work. And yeah, you should check out what we're talking about in the chat there about your organization, because as I wrote you to tell you the news about Matthew Green not coming, I realized you have almost the same acronym, being CWC. You're just missing the F. I'm like, foundation, that would be. Anyway, just a sign we should be working together, whatever it's called. But anyway, I did want to ask Pierre Cyr to just say one quick word. And also I wanted to ask everybody on the call to tell us what you think about what our policy priorities are. I mean, I think the anchor institution approach is obviously really interesting and we could think about that. And we also have thought about how to build an ecosystem without government. I mean, we're building one, it's just too small, on our own. But, certainly collaboration with Van City was top of mind. We had this whole conversion project going in the city of Vancouver, along with Van City and BCCA and other partners, Co-ops First, etc. And of course, pandemic that stopped. It needs to be put back on the rails, but there's other ways to build ecosystems. And Van City could be viewed as the anchor institution in a way in that project. But yeah, Pierre, I did want to just give you a chance as well, since you've done a bit of work in this space for us to make a big comment.
And Colin, I'd love to see the list of the candidates that you endorse, just in order to kind of advise maybe who we should be reaching out to as well. But hey, Hazel, I think when we did some work in the initial stages of the pandemic, we were trying to be as flexible as possible in the application of what worker co-op conversions, the sectors that it could be applied in. I think we talked a lot about some of the values that are there in terms of strengthening democratic and worker rights as well. There was certainly some political interest. We managed to get a lot of meetings, but I think going forward, especially with Randy Boisson, who might be your MP now, with his focus on tourism and also as Associate Minister of Finance role, I think there's an opportunity there to try to show how worker co-ops could help that sector specifically. I think what you'll end up seeing, likely through the mandate letters, which will probably be time for kind of mid-December, early January, some of the language of that will be very targeted on that sector, and that the government will likely not want to kind of throw too much stimulus out there, just with all the inflation and everything else that we're seeing right now, that would be counterintuitive, but I do think a very narrow focus on tourism and hospitality and demonstrating where worker co-op conversions could be extremely helpful in that space, especially in terms of strengthening worker rights, which has been very top of mind for the government. I think you can catch, you'll definitely get some political attention on that front, and I'd be happy to support that going forward. But every time I participate in these types of calls, I'm just impressed overall just by the underlying values that worker co-ops represent, and really appreciate the opportunity of being on tonight's call. Thank you very much. Merci.
Merci beaucoup, Pierre. Michael, are you able to take back over? I think our half hour is pretty gone by quickly, but
thanks, Hazel. Absolutely, I'm more than happy to take over. And I did I got a question in the chat, which was a direct message to me, which was oriented towards Colin. Colin, are there any resources that you could share with us this evening with respect to some of the work that you're doing, and just being able to take those resources back and that work back and being able to share it with our teams? Would that be something that you'd have access to?
Yeah, absolutely. Are they looking for stuff to follow the organization, or for stuff that we've accumulated in terms of information and candidates and that kind of thing?
I can speak for myself here. I'd be more than interested in getting my hands on both. So I don't know if you have any links that you'd be able to share, or some documents that you could email out and that we could share on behalf of CoopZone and CWCF. But I think that would be more than interesting in terms of the best practices you identified.
Great, fantastic. On it.
Thank you so much, Colin.
Thank you.
I appreciate that. Okay. Well, with that, why don't we move into our co-op zone aspect of this evening's session? Yes, thanks, Daniela. Yeah, very, very good point. We'll move into our co-op zone part of the session now. And with that, I have three wonderful people that I'd like to invite up to the virtual stage this evening. Meg Ronson, David Gray, and Russ Christensen, who is joining us by phone this evening. So he's the 705 in the participants that you see. Meg Ronson, I've had the pleasure of working with for just a little bit of time now through our various hats that we hold within the cooperative community. She works with the Waterloo Institute for Social Innovation and Resilience, WISER, at the University of Waterloo. She's also the program director of CoopZone, having succeeded Eric, who is also on the call this evening as our program director at CoopZone before Meg. And she's also a member of CMC's advisory board of Canada's emerging cooperators. Yes, the training program director. Sorry, I got a little carried away there. But it's been a real pleasure working with you, Meg, and happy to have you on the panel this evening. I'd also like to introduce David Gray, who is based in Vancouver, but doing a lot of work on worker cooperative development and cooperative development in general down in the United States. And I'm going to let him introduce that work, because from what it sounds like, he's doing a lot of cooperative development weekly. So we look forward to hearing about that. And then obviously Russ Christensen, who is a cooperative developer based in Campbellford, Ontario. Happy to have you all three on the call this evening. So I guess what I'll do is I'll just start off. Yeah, I introduced you, but I would like you to maybe introduce yourselves a little bit further. So I'll give you an extra minute here or so just to introduce yourselves. I'll start with Meg, continue on with David, and then we'll move to Russ. Meg, passing it off to you. Just introduce yourself to us.
Thanks, Michael, for that lovely introduction. Yes, I do wear lots and lots of hats. Some of them are cooperative adjacent, some of them are cooperative full on. And I think that's just virtue of how I kind of joined the cooperative movement, step by step. My background's in economic development. I hold a master's of economic development at the University of Waterloo, and have been working with the social innovation researchers there. So I'm coming at the cooperative movement from a systemic perspective, from a kind of like almost grassroots meets academia meets research and innovation. It's all very like weird buzzwords that us cooperators don't always love to use. But it's the language that I speak. I also speak, layperson economic developer language. And I think that's kind of what excited me so much about what Colin was talking about. Colin clearly can speak in multiple languages, and I don't mean French, English, and Spanish. I mean he's talking from the lens of grassroots organizers. He's talking from the lens of politicians. He's talking from the lens of community leaders, and that is a skill that cooperators desperately need. And so I'm so happy to be meeting Colin for the first time and becoming allies already. I can tell. I know that's not really an introduction. It's more of like a hooray, Colin. But yeah, that's me. Yeah, thanks so much, Michael, for inviting me to join today, representing Co-opZone.
Great. Thank you so much, Meg. And no, absolutely. I agree that that intervention by Colin was really interesting, and great to see that there's so much great work happening so close to home too. David, I want to give you the chance to introduce yourself.
Sure. Well, hello, everyone. So David Gray, live in Vancouver. I work for Project Equity. It's a nonprofit down in the States. And we've been working for about 9 years with a real focus on converting businesses to worker cooperative or other forms of employee ownership. Where I sit, I'm a senior client service manager at Project Equity, and that means I get the fun task of working basically 40 plus hours a week doing co-op conversions. And that's the terminology we use when a business is sold by the owner to the employees. And I kind of touch all the various facets of that. So it's exciting to talk with you all. I moved up to Canada. This is my 4th time moving to Canada. I'm from the States, but I clearly have some identity issues. So this is the 4th time I've moved up here. We moved up in June, and just really happy for that move. I'll share more stories and reflections.
David, I'm going to be picking on you a little bit this evening, so I apologize.
Wait, see, we just met and you're already doing this.
No, but I just, we had our kind of onboarding call for the panel. What was it, yesterday? And
yeah.
And I found the stories that you were telling so interesting. So if I could just kind of ask an introductory question to you right off the bat, what does a day in the life of David Gray look like when it comes to co-op conversions?
Oh man, stressful. Before I jump, I know that we're going to introduce one other first. Should we do introductions and then I can answer that question?
Sure. We can introduce.
I'm taking up space. I don't want to.
We can introduce Russ, and then we'll come back to you, David, on that question. But Russ, I wanted to give you the chance to introduce yourself, though I will imagine that a lot of people on the call already know who you are. Is Russ there by any chance?
Russ may be muted. Or his phone dropped. He's still there. Russ, you're muted. Kay, as host, are you able to unmute him? It's *6 on a phone. Michael, maybe you want to get David to answer that question about a day in the life.
Maybe we'll come back to David, and then we can go back to Russ. David.
Sure. So I'm
just
on
a minute. Can I interrupt for a minute?
Yes, please.
Russ can hear us. Use *6 to unmute, please.
Hey. Hello.
We can hear you, Russ.
Okay, that's great. I've been pressing *6, so it seems to work now, so that's great. Anyway, as I was saying, I live on a reforested farm near Campbellford, Ontario, which is near Peterborough. I've been working as a co-op developer for about 35 years, and I've helped start up about 250 or so co-ops, quite a few worker co-ops, but all kinds of different co-ops. And I was a founding member of a worker cooperative that was incorporated federally back in 1990 because we couldn't incorporate worker co-ops in Ontario at the time. We had to lobby for that legislation to be changed, and thankfully we had an NDP government in Ontario. Bob Rae was the premier, and we got that legislation to legally recognize worker co-op businesses as a legal structure in the province. So we incorporated federally, and the co-op was called Origins, and we marketed organic food products across Canada through food cooperative wholesalers and distributors. So that was my first work with worker cooperatives, and I was at the founding conference of the Canadian Worker Co-op Federation, and as one of the founders of the Ontario Worker Co-op Federation, which is no longer operating.
Great. Thank you so much, Russ. That's a great introduction. And I mean, we'll surely get a little bit more into depth about your experience with co-op development as we go through this session. But at this point, I'll come back to David.
Right,
And
keep me in the hot seat. I can see how this is gonna...
well, you know, I won't keep you in the hot seat for too long, I promise. But for now, I would really like to know, you know, what does a day in the life of David Gray Co-op developer look like?
Yeah, so, you know, I feel very privileged to be able to sit where I do. And that means I get to spend my whole time working at trying to move this and just powerful dream forward, right? I've lived in the States a long time. It is a really hard system to live in. But I get to do the work. So I say that, but I'm going to share a little bit what my day looks like. So just today, I'm looking at my calendar here. So Project Equity, we have about 20 employees. We've got a client service team of about 7. So my day started off with us meeting, talking over just kind of like, you know, trying to figure out how to make it through the week and deal with all the different things coming. One of the things that's exciting, so I'm going to slow down a bit. One of the things that's exciting at Project Equity is we have business development team. And so we're talking with business owners constantly about what it would look like if they sold to their employee base. That I think is really what sets us apart and allows me to do this work full time, because we've got a lot of interested owners into the process. And so this morning, what I was doing is looking at some deep financial analysis for a nursery that we've been working with the owner for about 9 months, maybe a little bit more. And he has decided to sell to his employees. I've been working with the employees to build capacity and understanding. And we are to the point where the negotiation about a sale price is hitting. And there are 2 moments that are stressful beyond anything else for me when I'm converting a business, and that's negotiating and the final 3 weeks before the sale goes through, where we're having to review all the legal documents, the loan applications, make sure we've got insurance that is set up correct, and we didn't forget to get a name off of a credit card or on another credit card. So this morning, I dealt with trying to figure out what would be the implication for the sale price for the employee base in the next 5 to 10 years. The challenge there is that we've had COVID. This was a business that experienced significant growth from COVID. And so trying to model out and to find ways to ensure that all parties are equally compensated for both the risk and the work that they're putting into it. Then I had a meeting. Well, I did a little bit of prep for about 30 minutes, and I had a meeting with owner of a converted business that we converted in August I was working with, and I could talk more about. And this owner is the president of the board of directors. And so I was coaching her on how to put together the agenda for the board meeting they were going to have later on today. After that, I did a little bit of click time because I'm way behind on putting my hours in for the week because it's just been too stressful and a lot of different things going on. Then I talked about some big picture. How can we as a team make things more efficient? If we really want this work to be easily modeled by others, that we can train others to do the same work. How can we make this more efficient so that others can come alongside and do this? And then I met with managers at this new co-op where I was helping them understand the P&L balance sheet because they were having to put together a budget for the first time, because like many businesses, a lot of business owners don't work with budgets. And so helping the management really understand the history of the business and where they can project it forward and how to present and work together on a budget to present to the board of directors and then at the broader membership. So that's what my days look like. And now I'm talking with you all. So it's been a fun day. But
so let me get this straight, David. You worked with 3 co-op conversions today.
I touched 3 co-op conversions today. Yeah.
That's impressive.
No, 4 or 5. Well, it's hard to say where you're at in the stage. So, there's been a couple email communication with one that we're going to kick off in December. I'll be starting that. And another one where I was working with an owner trying to get all of the historic numbers so that we can start our feasibility analysis.
That's so great. It's so great to hear that phenomenal work is happening. And I mean, just south of the border.
Well,
thank you so much, David.
Yeah, I'm doing it here, so in this desk.
Technically speaking, absolutely. Thank you so much, David. I wanted to just go back to Meg here. We've gotten into the topic of co-op conversions now. From the point of view of Wiser and the many hats that you have with the co-op sphere, how do you interact with conversions, and how do you see conversions on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, it's something that I talk about almost every day because that's kind of how I got my start in co-ops, was writing a paper, and I put it in the chat, writing a paper specifically on co-op conversions in Ontario with funding from the Atkinson Foundation, which is based in Toronto and has a mandate to advance decent work in Ontario. So they, among many other organizations, have been focusing on quality of work and fair wages and democratic participation and giving workers voices, things like that. Just kind of social justice-y stuff that we all love. And I think my perspective is I wouldn't say that I'm jaded just yet, but I think if you work in this kind of promotional awareness building space long enough, you start to learn what not to say and what to avoid, or what you want to caution people about. And David and I have talked about this, and Russ and I have talked about this, and Hazel and I have talked about this, just the fear of having people abuse or misunderstand the potential of worker co-op conversions. So when I say abuse, of course, I'm talking about situations where the original owner is just looking to offload a bad business on their employees and scoot. And I'm not saying that all business owners would do this. Some of them might not even realize that that's what they're trying to do. They might think, oh, I have this lovely business. Yeah, okay, so I have lots of liabilities. Oh, well, my workers can just take those over. No big deal. But that's not fair at all. And so that's kind of, there's a lot of fear of abuse, and that's a real challenge. The other thing is misunderstanding or over not misunderstanding so much as thinking. A lot of people like to look for silver bullets, and the co-op model and conversions as a solution. A lot of people like to hope that it can be a silver bullet for the challenges like the gray wave of business owners exiting their businesses, retiring out. And speaking as someone who wrote a paper a few years ago on this, one of the things we did try to say very clearly is this is not a solution for most businesses that are going through a succession. In fact, what we made the argument was that if only 1%, or even only a teeny tiny fraction of businesses with retiring owners did convert, it would still be an astronomical amount of conversions and would grow the co-op sector in Canada like crazy. And the truth, of course, is that we don't have the capacity for that, but we would love it if we did. And so people like David, who has the expertise to help co-op developers, and people like Russ as well. I shouldn't just say David, and Russ will talk about his experiences with conversions as well, and working a lot on feasibility and all this to say that we have a network of co-op developers, but a lot of them are only experts in certain elements, or they're only experts in or they're all retiring, right? That's the other thing. So I guess, yeah, from my perspective, this is true not just of conversions, but of all co-op development. And I'm preaching to the choir here, of course. The challenge being that we all can only do what we can do, and my role as the new training program director is to make sure that that all of the knowledge and expertise that people like Eric Toots King and Denise Guy and Marty Frost, and I could go on, all of these people, Peter Huff was my first mentor, that we capture and share back that knowledge to the next generation of business developers, young leaders. I loved Colin's idea of just going straight into the universities and just getting the kids, I can call them kids, I'm 30 now, getting the kids to just say, yes, business schools, give us a whole class on co-op development, and CoopZone can help, just hook those kids up with some mentorship, with some internships, co-op placements, believe it or not, co-op placements with co-ops. That's a thing that I've been pushing for years. I'm rambling, but yeah, that's kind of where my head always goes, is I'm about that co-op movement. I am a total hippie, and I just want to see co-ops everywhere.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much, Meg. I mean, yeah, just co-op education and cooperatives. Could you imagine? I did my co-op in a private company, and I just wish I'd had the opportunity to do it in a co-op. That would have been fantastic. Thank you so much for that, Meg. I mean, really, really impactful. And I think, with that, I just want to give Russ the opportunity to kind of speak to the way he interacts with co-op conversions and some of the experiences he's had, because I know he's had a lengthy experience with co-op conversions as well. And I know there's a recent one that he's been working on as well too. So Russ.
Okay. Thanks, Michael. I appreciate that. I'm glad Meg brought up hippies first before I did, because I grew up in the 60s and 70s. And I was surrounded by co-ops and credit unions and student demonstrations and all kinds of organizing. And it was a time of love and peace. And, I think we can certainly rekindle that kind of passion. And it's happening with climate crisis organizing and Friday demonstrations by students. So that kind of passion and grassroots action is really what cooperatives, from my point of view, are all about. So talking about co-op conversions specifically, I've been involved with a few over the years, and I'd like to do a lot more. I'm kind of jealous that David gets paid full-time to do that, because I've been a co-op developer for over 3 decades, and it's always a way to make a living. You kind of scrape together, different bits of money here and there where you can, but to actually get paid full time to do that, that would be fantastic. Some of the co-op conversions that I've been working with recently, and these are kind of initial discussions with business owners. One is investment firm in Toronto, and it's an ethical investment firm, and the owner is interested in selling the business to his employees. So we're in initial discussions about that. We'll see where it goes. Another one is with wood shop in Hamilton, and that has been a municipal project, and they'd like to turn it into convert it into a cooperative, not a worker cooperative, but a consumer cooperative. And right now they're in the process of leasing a new building, and I'm not sure what kind of organizational legal structure they're going to use yet, but the cooperative is still potentially on the table. And then in Kingston, just down the road from me, there's a painting business that is interested in selling to the employees, and there's also one in Winnipeg. So I had a couple discussions with them too. So there's all kinds of, different variety of businesses that potentially, I'm sure David could talk about this too, that potentially have interest from the employers to sell the business as an option to the employees. And I think one of the tricks in this whole process of co-op conversions is actually getting the employees interested and excited enough and educating them so that they understand what the opportunities are, because often employees don't want to take on the risk of owning the business, and they also don't necessarily want to take on the responsibility of being managers or on the board of directors and having the responsibility to keep the business going, and the things that entrepreneurs and that managers are used to taking or sharing that responsibility. So it's a whole leadership development and empowerment project in terms of getting employees to work together to manage the business. So I think that's sometimes a barrier that people don't see or don't think about. But when you have initial discussions with employees, often that'll come up.
Yeah, absolutely. I think those are all good points for us. And it's great to hear that, even though, there seems to be a bit of a difference in the way that David is working in co-op conversions. So great to hear about some contemporary developments in co-op conversions in Canada, because I think I can speak for everyone here when I say, we wish that we could see more co-op conversions north of the border as well.
Can I ask a question, Michael?
Absolutely.
This doesn't have to be about co-op conversions. It can be about cooperatives generally, and it's a question for Russ first, because he hasn't talked too much, and then maybe David can weigh in too. I'd like to know what they think of the ongoing investment readiness and social finance policy that the Canadian government has been pushing forward, and that cooperative anchor institutions like CWCF and CMC and myself really, and a few others are trying their best to be a part of. But there's always been a tension between the cooperative movement and the social enterprise movement, and for good reason, right? There's the risk of social washing that cooperatives like to stay away from. And actually, there's also a risk of co-op washing, if I'm being honest, but that's another discussion. So I guess my question for Russ and for David is how comfortable they are with the kind of this social finance, social enterprise interest that the Canadian government is continuing to kind of push forward, and the extent to which cooperatives can and should belong in that space.
Okay, that's a great question, Meg. I'd like to say, first of all, that, this social enterprise thing's not a new idea. Cooperatives have been doing social enterprises for 150 years or more. Cooperatives have always had economic and social objectives, and now also are adding environmental objectives to their business bottom line. So I think, there's government policymakers and politicians who also see social enterprises as a way of downloading government programs, basically privatizing government services, getting rid of union jobs in government, in the public service. So that's also part of the agenda of the neoliberal governments that Colin was speaking about earlier. And I think for cooperatives, it's really important for cooperatives not to just be seen as sort of, social enterprise, sort of not-for-profit or do-gooder organizations. Cooperatives are also very successful business enterprises, and they operate large and medium-sized and small, successful for-profit businesses as well. And I think cooperatives need to continue to really put their message out clearly that, yes, they do have social purpose objectives as well, and they could be viewed as social enterprises, but they're also in all other sectors of the economy, and that it's a different way of doing business. It's a way of doing business that brings democracy and equity to the workplace. And when you think about how much time people spend at their workplaces, or now working from home because of the pandemic, it's incredible that there isn't more demand. And I think millennials and Gen Z people are going to demand more say in their workplace. There's going to be more push for democracy in the workplace. And cooperatives are a great model that I think we need to continue to educate young people and business people about that model. And I think that building awareness, like Meg was saying earlier, is just an ongoing, job that we have to do. We are champions for cooperatives, so we have to continue every chance we get, tell a good story about a cooperative and talk about how cooperatives can bring democracy to the workplace and, bring equity and equality to workplaces so that people's quality of life improves. They have some control over their work.
Thanks, Russ.
You're welcome.
David.
Yeah, I could speak to this. I also want to just acknowledge my ignorance. In a lot of ways, I haven't been able to stay up on the Canadian kind of politics scene for the last 12 years that I was living in the States. But I would speak to the fact that I really believe for this movement to move forward, we need to, and I hate to use this metaphor, but in the States we use it sometimes to talk about a big tent party. And I think we need to be thinking about worker co-ops in a big tent way, recognizing that there's a spectrum of what a worker cooperative could look like. And that as much as if you were to put maybe 5 of us in a room together to design our ideal co-op, it might look very equitable, without a doubt, in all ways. I'm really aware that we have centuries that have put us in this place. This has been a long, long process that has put our economy into the reality that we're working and living in now. It's going to take decades to get us out. My own journey with regard to understanding kind of social justice, economic realities, it was a long process. It took time. It was me interacting with fair trade for the first time and starting to think about our economic system. Maybe the price of my mug, maybe I need to start with what is the cost to make it, and that those folks that are making it are paid a fair wage. That's how we should look at building the price point rather than what we can sell it for in the store. That's where my journey started, and that was 20 years ago. And if I hadn't been there and had that process, I don't know if I would have landed where I'm at now. And one of the concerns I have in our industry, and I see this in the States, and I don't know what it's like in Canada, so this is just me speaking out of ignorance here, but that sometimes there are folks that are so committed to this ideal sense that it makes it hard for them to communicate and talk with others that they can bring along. And part of the work I do is try to bring the owners and the employees along on that journey. And I talk about it being a spectrum. And I've got one group right now of 7 employees, and there's only 7 at this business. And they said, hey, we should be a collective. And I said, you know, you've been functioning with a very hierarchical structure for the last 20 years. That's a big change on top of already changing the governance structure, the patronage, all of these other things. I said, let's make sure that we build your structure so you can be that, but let's not try to do that in the next 6 months. What we got to do for this to be successful for everyone is the business needs to stay healthy. We only are going to see the impacts that we want if it's a healthy business. And just trying to ensure and put those pieces in there. So those are some of my comments, Meg. I don't know if that's helpful.
So Russ, you can't see me, but you know me, I'm a very expressive head nodding type of person in person and on calls. So I've been just emphatically nodding my head as you two have been talking. And I love the way you've described cooperativism as a spectrum. And I love that you brought up the fair trade movement. I think also of the social procurement movement. There are all kinds of cooperative allies, unions. Russ likes to bring up unions. That's a great example. Just all different kinds of movements and organizations and people, politicians who appreciate the different values and elements of cooperativism. We're all more or less doing the same thing, and it ties back to what I was talking about at the beginning about we're all saying the same words in different languages almost. And one of the most important skills, and I'll say it again, is being able to translate across different languages, be able to take off your activist hat, you're so because I'm a hippie, so I want to say, oh, down with the patriarchy, down with the neoliberals. But then if I'm talking to a very professional older white man, I'm not going to use that language. I'm going to say, I'm going to use David's language that he talked about. What do we need to do to keep this business together? Yeah, what do we need to do to see the value of this enterprise, which is a valuable thing? What do we need to do to see it continue in a way that is good and meaningful, right? There's all different ways of saying it. But yeah, I sent Michael another question that I wanted to ask, but I keep steamrolling over him, so I'm going to stop.
Well, I mean, I just, this has been such a really interesting conversation, and I wanted to just move into the next point here of, you talk about having this big tent think, David, but it's, if we use that big tent think, and I think that this could maybe open us into more of a collaborative conversation and discussion here as we move into the last 20 minutes of our session. But, what do existing worker cooperatives need right now? We've talked a lot about conversions and what their needs are, but what are the established needs of worker cooperatives at this point? And so I'd like to maybe go to Russ first, and then we can talk to David, and then Meg, you can talk after that. Russ, what do worker co-ops need right now?
Yeah, thanks, Michael. I think worker co-ops need what a lot of emerging cooperatives need, because most of the worker co-ops in Canada, some are established, but some are emerging, and they all need work and help with governance practices, financial control systems, marketing, some of the seminars that are being offered, the pragmatic peer learning that is being offered by the Canadian Worker Co-op Federation during this conference. That's one of the best things about these conferences with the Canadian Worker Co-op Federation, is the peer-to-peer learning and the sharing of knowledge between different cooperatives. I think that's the thing that strikes me the most, having been involved with cooperatives for most of my life, my adult life, that how cooperatives are so open to helping each other and sharing information and sharing systems and computer systems and financial systems and statements. You just don't see that in other businesses. Most businesses are guarding their finances and their financial statements and their knowledge very, very carefully, because we live in this kind of hyper competitive, individualistic world. So to share that kind of knowledge and information is just such a huge advantage for the worker co-op movement. So I would really strongly encourage the worker co-ops that are at the conference to, share honest and open information with each other, not just, about their successes, but about the challenges and the failures that they've experienced too, because we can learn a lot from those failures. I think the established cooperatives could do so much more to help emerging cooperatives, whether they're worker co-ops or other smaller emerging co-ops that are startups, or maybe they're only 3 or 4 years old. There's so many knowledgeable people in established cooperatives that are professionals in human resources and finance and marketing and legal. So there's just so much potential for mentoring and coaching from established cooperatives. And I think the people that are in established cooperatives would really enjoy mentoring and coaching some of the more innovative, entrepreneurial, emerging cooperatives and the younger people that are involved with those. So I think the cooperative movement needs to cooperate with each other a bit more and see themselves as a larger movement. As David was saying, it's kind of a bigger tent or a spectrum. But we all share the same values and principles, and I think that's what holds us together. And someday, those emerging cooperatives are going to be the bigger, successful cooperatives, and some of today's bigger, successful cooperatives may not be around. So it's like all businesses, right? Some businesses come and go, so we'll have to see. But I think there's a lot of potential for more collaboration between established and emerging cooperatives.
Great point, Russ. Thank you so much. David, did you have anything you wanted to add to that?
Not just echo, I agree. I think cooperation is going to be key for us as we move forward. And also for that cooperation to be useful, I think we need to identify what the needs are. So it's not just that we can help, but also what the needs are.
Mm-hmm. Very good point. Meg.
Spoken like a true co-op developer. Identify the needs first. That's a really good idea.
Well, and I'm just going to throw this little, it's not fitting into anything. In my work that I'm seeing, yes, there are those that are retiring, but there are a lot of Gen Xers that are, if you look at the numbers of how Gen Xers tend to change careers every 10 years, two of the last conversions I just converted were Gen Xers that had done something for 10 years and were ready to move on. And I think we need to recognize that that is also a dynamic at play. Not saying we shouldn't not prioritize the retirement dynamic, but that's also a key thing. Very
interesting. Meg, did you have anything you wanted to add to that question?
Oh yeah, all kinds of things come up. Yeah, finding out what I have a concern because I work at a university and I'm friends with a lot of cooperator researchers. But there's just a lot of researchers doing a lot of research on co-ops, and I just wish that academic institutions would finance more participatory or more involved research. So I'll give you an example. Hazel put in the chat a research group out of the University of Toronto, Université de Sherbrooke, and I think, well, what else? St. Mary's. There are a few different collaborators on the Co-op Convert project. And they've done so much work and research into co-op conversions, and there's so much literature on all things cooperative, but there's this weird silo that happens between researchers and I don't know what the answer is. And yeah, I'm a former researcher, and I struggle to find ways to make sure that the research that I'm doing benefits the subjects of my research. And Evan's got his hand up, so I'm really wanting to hear from Evan.
Yeah, I just wanted to point out, Meg, I'm doing the master management at St. Mary's right now, and I spoke about this earlier in the workshop as well. But if you look at research on business models as a whole, there's little to no mention of cooperatives within the business world, and so that's where it is important for all this research to happen, so long as it's adding to the understanding of cooperatives within the context of business models. So, I mean, that's an important part of why research is important. But I agree with you as well that, I started taking this master management program because I wanted to learn, like, how do I run a successful co-op? Unfortunately, what I'm learning is that there is no blueprint to running a successful co-op, because a co-op is it's like an ecosystem. It's like the collective experience and knowledge of the members that are adhering to a set of values and principles, and that's what's guiding the development of the organization. So it's not like if you do XYZ, you will run a successful co-op. You have to find, and Russ was talking about this as well, find people that have these shared values and principles, and using the ICA statement is, the best thing we've got right now because everybody's buying into it, and use that as the way to guide how you do what you're doing. And that's how we're going to see success, I think. And I also agree with all of the talk about networking, because we shouldn't be reinventing the wheel. There's so many ways that we can learn from all of the other people that are doing what we're trying to do. Maybe they're doing it a slightly different way, but they're all trying to achieve the same why. So I think that's those are all important parts to proliferating this model.
Thanks so much, Evan.
Meg, if I could just add a quick comment to your discussion about researchers and university and things like that. A good co-op developer is also a researcher, because as a co-op developer, you have to learn about different types of businesses. You have to learn about politics and legal and the different environments that businesses operate in, because it goes back to what David was saying earlier. In the end, the cooperative aspect is obviously important, and we think it's an advantage. However, you have to have a viable business, and it has to be generating a positive cash flow so that your business can pay people well and pay a living wage and, benefits, and hopefully some kind of, pension for the workers if it's a worker cooperative particularly. So, why would you start a worker cooperative in a business where you can only make minimum wage? Like, it doesn't make any sense. That's not a business that you should be doing as a worker cooperative. A worker cooperative should have higher standards than that for its members. So I think the research aspect and sharing that with academics, as well as understanding that co-op developers are also continuously doing research and doing professional education, even if they're only doing it, on their own, like self-taught, which is still a good way to do it, but there's lots of courses that you can take to help improve how you're running your business, just like Evan is taking the course at St. Mary's.
Absolutely, Russ. It's funny because I am on both sides of the research spectrum. I'm on that practitioner developer side, and then I've also worked in academia as well, and talked a lot with talked a lot to that as well. And thanks, Evan, for sharing your perspective. And I guess I kind of share Denise. So Denise just said something that I think that's where my gut kind of started to be, all these academics are getting all the money. And Denise, just so I'll read it for Russ, there seems to be more money within the system to focus on research rather than technical assistance grants for co-ops and startups. And that's kind of where I'm starting to feel as well, like as someone who wants to see both of them working together, where they meet in the middle is that professional development work that Denise and Russ and myself and probably everyone on this call is looking to create more energy towards. And I think maybe my gripe is against the funding systems that we all have to rely on in order to advance our work. And I'm not alone in this nonprofit. I follow this nonprofit leader who every single day puts out posts about how frustrating it is to be asking for money from organizations funders that have no idea how to affect change, how to support the communities that the nonprofits are supporting. And it's the same with all of us working as cooperators and researchers and cooperatives. Saying, oh yes, I'm going to spend every single dollar that you give me on paying students to do interviews of worker co-ops and that's it. Instead of saying, no, I'm going to spend some of it on interviews, some of it I'm going to pay Russ Christensen to, do a co-op conversion and train a bunch of younger, you know what I mean? Like it's so challenging to find dynamic enough funding to do the real, like, get your hands dirty kind of research that cooperative research requires.
Well, there's that old saying that the pen is mightier than the sword. So research that's really, incisive and I would say radical is really important, and it provides the kind of impetus and passion and energy and ideas that people need to move forward. And at the same time, funding research is less threatening than funding on-the-ground co-op development. So it's less threatening to the existing dominant structures in our society. So it's not surprising to me that, with the odd exception over the decades, there hasn't been much of a financial commitment from any level of government in Canada to support and finance cooperative development and those early stage like feasibility studies and group dynamic building and business planning and market research and all the things that you need to do in early stage co-op development that often the proponents of the co-ops don't have the money to finance that themselves, and they don't have the knowledge, so they don't even start, they don't even try. So if we have, something like a cooperative development initiative program that we had in the early 2000s for about 8 or 9 years, that would be a very positive step. And that's the kind of thing that Hazel was talking about earlier, that the Canadian Worker Co-op Federation, together with Cooperatives and Mutuals Canada, is got some proposals into Human Resources Canada and Employment, and we'll see what happens. We'll continue to lobby. It's positive environment politically right now in Canada because we have a minority government, and it's a minority Liberal government. So I think there's a lot of potential, and we just have to keep, working on that every day. That potential is real, and we know that human beings want to have more control in their lives, and there's all kinds of issues around inequality and racism, etc., that cooperatives can help deal with.
Yeah. No, that's so great. Thanks, Russ. I see that we have about 5 minutes left on our call this evening or this afternoon, depending on where you are. I wanted to just open it up to any questions or comments from those who are with us this evening.
I'd love to hear from any actual worker co-operators. I myself am not a worker member. I'm just staff. I'm just a little staff member.
It's Evan here. I'd like to pick up on what Tom was talking about with the Kaja at Mondragon. and the Co-op Fund in Emilia Romagna. I just did a presentation as part of the course. I just finished the course that Tom used to teach on the field study and research tour, and we would have been going to Mondragon except for COVID. So hopefully another year I'll get to take the trip. But Mondragon's membership fees are so much higher than what a lot of worker co-op fees are in Canada here. And I couldn't help but think that being able to access their own capital like that was such a big contribution or a contributing factor to their ability to develop all these complementary co-ops. Like we're talking about $16,000 US on average is their membership fee. And if you look, I don't know the current statistics, but if you look at, you know, they have over 85,000 employees, and the closest data that I could find said that about a third of those were members. So you take a third of 85,000 people, multiplied by $16,000 US, they've got over $400 million in member capital to use to do whatever the hell they want with. So there's a way to fund this, and it's not necessarily by going to the government and trying to get something out of them. So, you know, but obviously people in the cooperative world aren't the richest folks out there. So, you know, it's a challenge one way or another, but I do think that the reason that Mondragon was able to do what they did was because of that high membership fee, and then leveraging that membership fee specifically to develop and proliferate complementary co-ops. Our membership fee is only $1,000, and that's, you know, that we only have 6 members. It's not even enough to cover a payroll, you know, and we kind of came up with that arbitrarily because we were self-funded when we incorporated. We're a construction co-op. We all had our own tools and everything and vehicles, so we didn't need to pool a whole bunch of capital to pay to build out the co-op. But now that I think about it down the road, we should have tripled at least the membership dues, because then at least we could have covered like a full payroll, for example, would make a huge difference, you know, when you've got cash flow issues or things like that, because those are the kind of things that sink a business. So that's my thought.
Yeah, I had the pleasure of going to Mondragon in the 90s, and it was really inspiring. And you know, they have found a way to build a whole ecosystem there. And you know, we're always trying to think in Canada, how can we, you know, build an ecosystem for cooperatives that can meet some of those requirements. And you know, some of that research has been done, and I know Canadian Worker Co-op Federation has some papers that they've done, documents that they've written over time. So I think all those stories are really inspiring, and you know, even the Harvard Business Review writes stories about Mondragon and Emilia Romagna. So I think the more we get that information out there, the better.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I just put in the chat, obviously, il faut tout le temps mentionner Québec et l'environnement très supportif qui aide à soutenir tous les co-op, and we have a lot to learn from the kind of history of cooperativism that Quebec has by virtue of it being so culturally distinct from the rest of Canada, for better or worse.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's a good point. We see that, you know, in a number of the different co-op development initiatives happening in Quebec that aren't otherwise present in the rest of the provinces in Canada, like Eva Co-op, for example.
Yeah, and other minority groups, right? Minority, you know, disenfranchised groups like francophones in not only in Northern Ontario but out in Acadia, and yeah, that's where co-ops belong most, is where people are like, well, no one's helping me, let's get together and help ourselves.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, I see we are at time. I want to do one last call for questions and comments for our panelists here this evening.
Michael, I had my hand up before and I don't think you noticed me. That's not a big deal. I just put it into the chat instead, but I don't know. I'm still looking for what I was looking for in the first part of this, which is like, what do you think we could be doing differently that would get the resources that are needed in the ecosystem? Because yes, there's cultural differences with Quebec and that's part of it, but there's also like many millions of dollars flowing from the government, right, into the CDR, into federations, et cetera, that we just do not have in English Canada. And in the US, I know municipalities and foundations and some other kinds of funders are putting those things out. Where can we look and how can we put it so that we can get their attention, whether government or foundations, to resource this? Because we have a great plan, right? And that's not the problem, I don't think. I mean, we've studied Mondragon. I've had the pleasure of going as well. The challenge is figuring out how to resource this work, and we're at time, but that could go into the Miro or the chat, or if anyone wants to take time, I could stay on a few more minutes, certainly if others are available.
Yeah, absolutely, Hazel. So sorry I didn't see your hand up there, but I think that's a really good point that you bring up. You know, there really is an environment that's different in the States with different RCDG grants for cooperative development. You know, what do we need to see, right? And what do we need to do? You raise a really good point. Maybe this is just the last question that I'll put out to our panelists here in kind of a popcorn format. Anyone, please feel free to chime in on that.
It's a systemic, slow shift that sees people understand their economic success as being tied to one another rather than tied to their own abilities. I think that's something that it goes back to that, that culture of.
Oh, sorry.
Go ahead, Russ.
Oh, I'd like to just go back to something David said earlier, which is around the history, the hundreds of years of history of colonialism and capitalism, and the last 250 years and mercantilism before that. So we've had those systems, and they've actually gotten worse since Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan were in power. And cooperatives from the very beginning have always been a way to counter the impacts of capitalism. But the reality is that we do live in a global capitalist system. It's a sea of capitalism that we're rowing our cooperative boats in. And, you know, we just have to continue to do that and prove that the model is better. And the more we do that, the more people will join us. I think it's actions speak louder than words. So I think that's what we need to just continue to do.
I think my quick comment would be, it can be tempting to look at what other models are working in other places. There are a wealth of resources here in Canada. There are some unique value sets that set Canada apart. Due to the smaller population size and the interconnection, more Canadians are probably interacting with a co-op than I know anywhere close to what's going on in the States. So I think there is great potential, but it will be, I think, when, and I guess I'm counting myself in the circle now too, when we as co-op advocates, developers, really focus on what is our unique situation, and it's probably going to be different based on our regions because of the uniqueness of Canada, but looking for local initiatives that make sense for where we're at. So what might work here in Vancouver, partnering with Van City, might be very different. It might look more similar to what has happened in Quebec, but maybe things in the prairies are going to look different. You know, I think encouraging development, right? We do the research and development, we talk about R&D. And I think if we can use the concepts that we see in science and institutions, where you do put money into trying the different experiments, that's what we need to be doing here, I think. And being, you know, I come out of Silicon Valley in some ways, quick to try something, the smallest expression of it, quick to fail and move on. I think we need to have that freedom.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
I can stay on for a little while, but I'm going to crack a beer.
Good call.
Hazel said she might stick around just to chat and hang out. I'm totally down for that.
Well,
I
I'm
know.
gonna
Oh, sorry.
go ahead, David.
Oh, this is Frank actually.
Oh, sorry, Frank.
From no, it's fine. We have very similar haircuts. It's easy to mix us up. But I was gonna say one of the things I've seen as a challenge in the trying to get the co-op movement to take off is just getting that past that cultural the ingrained colonial capitalist individualism that I see people who are struggling to try to get businesses going or start. And when you talk to them about co-ops, they look at you like you've got two heads because they just don't know anything about them. And so I think we really do need to get just do evening coffee houses where it's it's open invitation, where here's a 101 on what being a worker owner co-op is. Those types of things, because I think it really is that grassroots here, that it's not even necessarily money that's impeding people. It's just not even having a clue what they're looking at.
I think that's a great point, Frank. And I'm gonna relinquish my facilitator duties at this point in the evening. One of the things that's been really interesting to work on with Meg at Canada's Emerging Cooperators is we've created this co-op cafe. It's virtual, obviously. And I mean, it's based off an initiative that's been going on in BC for quite some time. And we have some of our colleagues, Zoe Cretin and others at the BCCA to thank for the development of the idea. But, it's just an environment in which people can get involved in cooperatives and ask the stupid questions and really learn more about the sphere. And I think that's what you're kind of getting at there is, just kind of a no nonsense environment where people can just learn about the sector and really how approachable it is.
Yeah, so thanks everyone for I can help Michael kind of bang his gavel and say thanks to our panelists today for really having such a fun, just relaxed. I feel calmer already. Normally I feel really anxious about, we all have to change the world, right? But it's so affirming to be able to change the world alongside one another like this. So thanks everyone for joining, and it was such a pleasure to meet Colin as well. So thanks, Colin, for joining us.
Yeah,
Yeah,
thanks
thanks
everybody. Sorry,